when we left off and went to lunch, we were just finishing up Module 4. We talked about kind of the call flow model. You remember my 12-step program? You know, now everybody's an Asterholic, right? We talked about adding extensions and devices and building up a very basic PBX where we have a few phones that can call each other. In the next module here, we really want to dive in more into the dial plan, learn some more basic extensions, and more than that, learn the basic syntax of the dial plan and how to put extensions and applications and priorities and arguments together to do some more interesting stuff than what we've done before. So our goals, oh, where'd my clicker go? Well, there's two of them here. That's the nice thing is which one works. That one, there we go. So we're going to talk about what the dial plan is, learn a little bit more about context, extensions, and priorities, learn to use some basic dial plan applications. So far we've used the dial application. We're going to add to that and then do some more examples. And then we're going to use a context, extension, priority together and start adding some other things to our dial plan here. So I explained a little bit about the dial plan earlier this morning, but I want to go into a little more depth. Remember that the dial plan in Asterisk is not just a routing table like in a typical PBX. It's much more powerful. It's really the logic and the heart and the soul of the system. And so we're going to spend quite a bit of time this afternoon in the dial plan and doing more dial plan examples here. And again, I'm going to give the same caveat I gave earlier today. I'm doing live demos. I may make a few mistakes. That's okay, right? We're doing it all live. What's that?
You learn more from them.
You learn more from other people's mistakes, right? I hope so. If you can learn from my mistakes, you're doing all right. So we talked a little bit about the kind of the structure of the dial plan, that we can break it up into contexts. Contexts each have one or more extensions. Each extension can have one or more priorities, and each of those priorities calls an application. So let's go into just a little more detail on each of these topics, and then put them all together. Now, remember that the context is kind of this high-level organizational unit within our dial plan. And it's just a way of dividing our dial plan up into smaller chunks, manageable chunks. And these chunks are independent from each other, unless we specifically tell them to be linked together. So you could have extension 6001 over here in our users context, like we did in that previous example. And then we could have another context over here called Derek. Hi, Derek. So we could have a context over here called Derek and have an extension 6001, and they would be completely independent from each other, right? So this is the way that you keep different parts of your dial plan separated out from other parts, and we can use this whether it's for a class of service or for security reasons, keeping these callers from being able to interact with these parts of the system, those sorts of things. Remember that the syntax for a context is just put the context name in square brackets. Please don't put any spaces in the name of a context. That'll confuse Asterisk. You can use underscores, you can use hyphens. Just don't use any spaces at the name. Okay? So there's our context. Now, one of the things that's useful to do is to link one context to another. And there's several different ways to do this. We talked about templates a little bit earlier. Another way of doing this is with what we call an include statement. So here's an example where I've got a context called users. It's got 6001, 6002. And then it's got an include statement that says include the features context. And what that means is if I were to dial extension 6500 in the users context, Asterisk will still go look in that users context. And when it doesn't find what it's looking for there, then it will follow that include statement and go look in the features context. If it finds that extension 6500 in the features context, it will treat it as if it had been in the users context. So that include is saying, pretend that the stuff in features is really here in users. Does that make sense? We'll show how you may use that a little bit later. But I want to at least introduce you to the syntax before we go on. Okay, so that's contexts. Now, each context has one or more extensions. And again, like I explained before, an extension is not a phone. An extension is not a device. An extension is just a set of actions that has a name or a number that we can use in our system. Now, I thought that was my phone. I was like, wow, that was a pretty good demo. Now, the identifiers for extensions can be names or numbers. So we can have an extension 6001, 6002, like we did in the demonstration. But we could also have an extension with the name of Tom. Why might that be useful? Can I pick up this phone and dial Tom? Not very easily, right? But what about a soft phone or a SIP call using a URI? If I want to call Jared at redhat.com, that's just a SIP URI. I should be able to dial that from a soft phone and Skype, those sorts of things. So we can have extensions in Asterisk that have names and not just numbers. Okay? So again, the syntax is the word extend, a little arrow formed by an equal sign, greater than sign, then the name or number of that extension, comma, the priority number, comma, and then the application and any parameters or arguments that you pass to the application in parentheses there. Okay. So we talked a little bit about priorities, but now I want to talk a little bit more about priorities. So you can have multiple steps within an extension. First do step number 1, then do step number 2, and then do step number 3. So by a show of hands, for the people who are a little bit older in the room here, how many people have used the basic programming language? That's what I started with many years ago on a Commodore 64. Do you remember when you were programming in BASIC that you would number the lines and it was like 10, 20, 30, 40? Well, Asterisk isn't even that nice because it makes you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can't skip over your priority numbers. Okay? You have to start at 1 and they have to be sequential. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay?
You have to reorder a bit occasionally.
Yeah, it may mean that. Now there's some tricks we can do and we'll talk about that on the next slide. But again, what's that? Right here. When Asterisk runs out of priority numbers, it hangs up the call.
1, 2, 3, 6, 7.
It'll go 1, 2, 3, hang up, which is what you want to have happen for security reasons. Okay? So, and you'll see a message on the CLI, like I talked about earlier, this auto fall through message saying, hey, I couldn't find the next priority. I'm done. I'm hanging up the call. Okay? Now, the developers have made it slightly nicer in that you still have to have the number 1 as your first priority, but after that you can use n as the priority. And n just says, well, whatever the previous number was, add 1 to it, and that's the next priority. N is for next. And so you can go 1, n, 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 n. And then you can move things around without having to go in and renumber all your lines, which is better. Okay? The problem with that, though, is what if you want to refer back to a particular line, but it's not priority 5, it's just priority n? How do you refer back to that line? So we have to have a label. We have to have an identifier or an alias for that particular line. And so the syntax we use is we put the n as the priority, and immediately after the n, we put parentheses and the name of a label that we can use to identify that particular priority.
I think I already answered my question.
That's all right.
If you're doing AEL,
Right. So his question is if you're using AEL, and if you're not familiar with AEL, AEL is the alternative extension language. It's another syntax that you can use to write your dial plan in. It doesn't use priority numbers at all. It just bases them on the way that they're written in sequence in the file. Okay. So in this case, we've got a label called label, oddly enough, of that for that third priority, and then we could somewhere later in our dial plan we could say, hey, jump back up to this particular priority called label, and you could use that label anywhere you use the priority number. We'll see an example here in a minute. Okay. So that's labels. Next, I want to talk a little bit about applications. Applications are the really cool thing in the dial plan. They're the workhorses. They're the things that actually do real actions on a call. So things like answering a ringing phone, or sending the call to voicemail, or playing a sound file from disk, putting a caller in a call queue, putting someone in an audio conference bridge, voicemail, looking up the stock market or the weather or something on the internet, querying a database, all those sorts of things, opening your garage door, whatever it is that you want to accomplish with your Asterisk system. There are these applications that do the actual work. So most of these applications, you pass them parameters, you pass them extra information to tell them how to do their job. And so you put those in parentheses, and you put commas between those different parameters. You'll still see some older examples out on the internet from the good old days of Asterisk where we use the pipe character between the parameters instead of the comma. Please don't use that syntax. We got rid of it a long time ago. It no longer works, but it's going to cause you heartache if you continue to use it. But just so you're aware of it, if you see examples out there with the pipe character between the parameters, don't use it. Put commas in there instead. Okay? Now, let's look at a few sample applications and start to get a feel for some of the applications and how they work. Probably the easiest application to understand out there is the answer application. What's it going to do? It's going to answer the call, right? Makes sense. Now, in certain circumstances, you want to have asterisk answer the call before it continues on. So you may want to have it answer the call before it plays a sound prompt or before it sends the call to voicemail, that sort of thing. In the case we gave earlier where Bob is calling Betty, do you really want asterisk to answer the call and then try to call Betty's phone? Probably not, because for call detail records reasons, you don't want that to show as an answered call even if Betty never answered her phone, right? So if you're just calling through to another device, you usually won't answer the call first. But if you're playing sound prompts or sending people to an IVR menu, an auto attendant menu, or voicemail, those sorts of things, you want to answer the call and then continue on in the dial plan. So there's the answer application. Pretty simple, right? The next application, I gave you a preview of this in an earlier demo I did, and that's the playback application. The playback application is going to load up a sound prompt from disk, play that to the caller. Okay? And it's going to ignore any touch tones or any talking that you do on the line while it's playing back that sound file. It's just ignore the caller and play a sound file to it. Okay? So what you pass is the parameter to this playback application. The first parameter is the name of the sound file that you want to play. But you leave off the file extension. And the reason why you leave off the file extension is, you remember when I did that core show translation earlier and it showed the different codecs and which ones were the easiest to transcode? When you do a playback, asterisk will look at all the files that are available with that name that you specified and say, well, if I've got it in GSM format and I've got it in WAV format, oh, I see that WAV format's easier for me. There's less transcoding involved for me to send that to this caller. I'll play that file. So it picks the, it's smart about the way that it picks the best file to play to the caller. Okay. The other thing I'll point out is that if you, by default, if the call hasn't been answered already, the playback application will actually answer the call and then play back the sound file. There is a parameter that you can pass to tell it not to do that. If for some reason you want to play audio before you answer the call, which is called early media, but that's kind of beside the point here. So let's look at an example here of the playback application in its most simple form. Okay. In this case, what's it going to do? It's going to load up a sound file off of the disk called hello-world, and it's going to be hello-world.wave or hello-world.gsm or hello-world.mula, whatever format you have it in, and play that back. Okay. Now by default, asterisk is going to go look in the var_lib asterisk sounds directory. Underneath that, there will be a subdirectory for the language, which defaults to English. But if you want your prompts in Spanish or in French or whatever your favorite language is, you can set the channel language, and then it'll go look for that sound prompt in that particular language. So it makes it very nice to make multilingual sound prompts. Okay. So when you build asterisk, one of the things, again, it's going to give you a list of all the different sound formats, and you get to choose which ones you want to download and which ones you want to install of the different sound formats. Okay. I want to talk just really briefly about the concept of early media or early audio. And in this case, what you're doing is you're telling asterisk, hey, before you answer this call, go ahead and send this audio back. This is typically used, typically if Bob picks up his phone and calls Betty, while Betty's phone is ringing, there's ringback coming on the line, right? Bob hears the phone ringing back in his ear. What if you wanted to play like hold music instead of ringback there? This would be an example of how you could do that. Anybody have a cell phone carrier who actually charges money for that feature? So when people call you, they have to hear your favorite song before you answer the call? Well, here you can do it for free. It doesn't cost you $5 or $10 a month. Okay? So the way that we do that in asterisk is two pieces. The first piece is to call an application called progress. Progress just signals to the phone on the other end that I'm not ready to answer the call, but I do see that you're sending me your messages. I'll get back to you in just a second. Okay? That's the first piece. The second piece is then to pass this no answer option to the playback application, and so it plays the sound back without answering the call yet. So in this case, instead of hearing ring back, they're going to hear, please hold while I try that extension. Okay? All right. The next application that we want to talk about is the hang up application. I bet you can guess what that one does. Well, it hangs up the call. Now, it's always a good idea, as a generalization, to make hang up the very last application you call in any extension.